Welcome, and thank you for joining me. Let me get a little better situated here. Let's see. All right, let me know if I'm a little blurry. I'm out in the garden. I'm out in a different spot in the big garden. And I can see you. Hey, Kaylin, thanks for joining us. And C. Jones, thanks for joining us as well. So, hi. Happy Thursday, everybody, and thank you for joining me here. I am Mary at Mary's Heirloom Seeds. Oh, good, I'm glad. Sometimes, depending on where I'm at, depending on which garden I'm in, Married with Chickens, thanks for joining us. Hey, Nicole, thanks for joining us. Depending on which garden I'm in, sometimes my reception here isn't that great. And hey, Jesse, thanks for joining me. Sometimes I didn't, okay, so if you joined me last week and I didn't respond to your comments, I apologize. None of the comments were showing up on my screen while I was live, which was kind of frustrating. Hey, Deborah, thanks for joining me. Hey, Kaylin. Always a pleasure to have you joining us here at Mary's Heirloom Seeds on our YouTube channel. So behind me here is my big garden. You can't really see it that well, but over the last couple months, we had it completely fenced in to keep out the deer, to keep out the hogs, to keep out the rabbits. I mean, there's so much wildlife here that we really wanted to make sure that we had a successful harvest, but also for seeds. We depend on those seeds to share with our customers, so we wanted to make sure that the critters didn't get to it. In the process, I've planted a bunch of stuff here. Let me kind of scoot over here. You can kind of see a little bit of what we got going on here. We've got, hey, Denise, thanks for joining me. You finally figured out how to comment. So every time I go live here, I try to share a little bit of a recap. So the last couple weeks, we've been sharing a couple of really awesome topics. So I'm in the shade, which is pretty awesome for me. It was in the 90s today, so it's a little hot. The last couple weeks, I've been sharing some important topics. In particular was growing in uncertain times. We are expanding our gardens because of the current situation in the world. You've got potential food shortages. You've got, even if you can get the food, it's ridiculously expensive. I'm seeing some pretty significant price increases in our food. So growing more is awesome. We also shared last week on expanding your garden. So I've got an area over here that is not in the fenced in portion of our garden, and that is a shaded garden. So we're going to be expanding there to share what we can grow in our shaded garden. I collected what's called a red mushroom pepper. It's green, but I wanted to pick some up anyway and just to see it. Denise says organic buying will bankrupt me. Growing your own organic food is in the long run cheaper. So I mentioned earlier we had a fence built. This fence is not cheap, but in the long run, it will not only increase the value of our property that's kind of more along the lines of if you're going to sell it, but it will also save me from losing some of our organically grown produce to critters, deer, hogs, rabbits. For those of you who don't know, we rescued 2 bottle baby kittens. They were 10 days old, I believe, when we brought them home. This is my first experience with bottle feeding kittens. I was a nanny in what I say a previous life, a very, very long time ago in my teens. So, hey, thanks for joining me. So I have experience raising babies, but not kittens. So this is a whole new ball game for me. We started feeding every 2 hours and then every 3 hours, now every 4 hours. So I am very sleep deprived, but I'm thoroughly enjoying the process. But I've still managed to stay on top of seed orders. We are still shipping out in 6 to 7 days. If you have questions about growing from seed, in the description section of this video, you will find links to our different social media pages, a sign up link. Thank you, Denise. I appreciate it. I'm exhausted. My glasses kind of hide my exhaustion. You can find a link to our e-newsletter sign up, our comprehensive planting guide, a couple of videos and links that might be helpful for you. And also, if you have specific questions that you don't necessarily ask during a video, you can always send an email to mary@marysheirloomseeds.com and I will answer. So today is just a recap and kind of ask your questions. If you have specific questions, I'm happy to answer. I also want to answer some questions that I've received through the week in emails that I answered the customers, but I also wanted to share that with you. So the first question is about okra. So, sorry, there's all kinds of critters around here. So one of the questions I received was, I want to make sure I'm not missing you guys. Okra, do those seeds need to be purchased every year, or can you save them for a little bit? And what happens if you're not getting thriving seedlings? Ingborg says, you've got kittens. My chicken mama just hatched. Oh, baby chicks. Those are so cute. I'm not doing baby chicks this year yet. I hopefully will be doing them in winter when it isn't, as what I say, hot as the surface of the sun. It is over 90 degrees out here, hence the tank top and the shade. It's really hot. So yes, we've added 2 teeny baby kittens. They're now 13 weeks old. I'm sorry, 3 weeks old. How many zucchini, rampicant, and scarlet runner beans and Chinese beans in a row in an arched trellis? I'm concerned they might be too congested. I will answer that in just a second. So the first question was about okra. Okra, if stored properly, if you purchase the seeds from us, have a high germination rate, approximately 90%. And if you store them properly, you can store them for about 3 years before they start to lose some of their viability. Now, if you're growing okra seedlings and maybe they aren't thriving, there's a couple things that might be beneficial for you to know or for you to change or update. Too much water or not enough water will definitely affect your seedling growth. Yeah, I should have band-aids all over all my fingers right now with as many cuts and whatnot I've gathered in the garden. So if you have too much water, it is going to make it waterlogged, and not enough oxygen will be able to circulate, so that you will basically rot the roots and they won't thrive. Not enough water means that your seedlings aren't growing fast enough because they're starving of water. If the soil isn't warm enough. So if you're in Florida, the soil is warm, and okra is a heat-loving plant. Stored properly like a refrigerator, not necessarily. I did have that question as well, and I will get to that as soon as I'm done with this. We're going to talk about seed storage very shortly in a second. Now, if it's too cold in the soil, right now, I don't have that problem, and a lot of people don't have that problem. But if you are in an area that is too cold, if you start your seeds too early, which I did in that way far bed way over there, it will either take longer to germinate or they will not thrive until it gets warm. And lastly is, sometimes I find that okra seedlings, they kind of are slow to start, and all of a sudden they just explode and they get really tall and really big and they get really bushy. So sometimes it's just the slow growth portion. Now what you can do is you can give them a little bit of a liquid nutrients like mountain flower compost tea, or you can do I don't know, there's a lot of different things. You can do a kelp meal tea, you can do worm castings tea, just to give them a little bit of a boost. Now when I say stored properly, and I'm talking about seeds, typically you want your seeds stored in a cool, dry spot away from direct sunlight. So you don't have to store your seeds in a freezer or a refrigerator. For long-term storage, some people do prefer a freezer, which is totally fine. But if I had to store all of my personal seeds in a refrigerator, I would need like 3 closets full of of seed storage space. And that just isn't, it's not going to happen. But it just isn't reasonable for me. So a cool, dry, dark spot. So don't store it in the garage. Don't store it outside in a shed. Don't store it in your car. If you do store it in a basement that might have a water heater, store it in an airtight, watertight container, because I have heard of people who've had their water heater burst or leak, and now all of a sudden their seed storage is gone because the containers they were storing in weren't proper. It doesn't have to be a cardboard box. It can be a glass jar. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. It can be a tote in a closet. So stored properly doesn't necessarily have to be, you know, like the Svalbard seed vault that is in, I don't even know what country that's in. I want to say Sweden, but I'm not 100% sure. So it doesn't have to be this crazy, super expensive seed storage or refrigerator or freezer. I'm itchy because I got mosquito bites everywhere. Sorry about that. All right, so that is our okra information on seed storage and growing them. Now, sorry, I had a question here and I wanted to go back and read it. How many zucchini, that is the vining zucchini, we call it tromboncino, scarlet runner beans and Chinese in a row next to an arched trellis? So that is a very good question, and it's really going to depend on a couple things. One, how big is your trellis? How big is your row? Typically, for pole beans or runner beans, you're going to plant them every 6 to 12 inches. So you're going to have to figure out how long is your trellis and how many you can fit. Zucchini is the same. I would say 8 to 12 inches because it is a vining zucchini, not just a bush, like a blue lake bush bean. So because you're referring to vining crops, usually it's 6 to 12 inches depending on what you're growing. And yes, they can definitely overcrowd each other. But if you give them a tall enough place to grow, they're really going to take over that whole spot. So let me show you really quick what we have here. You can see that I have a fence there. I have a fence along the whole side there. All of that is going to be eventually, all of that is going to be trellised. So the fence was just completed about 3 days ago. So I'm really excited about that. We're waiting on the last finishing touch for the gate. And I will have this entire garden space. It's big. I'm super excited about it. I will have this entire garden space with a 6-foot tall fence. So hopefully we keep most of the deer out. We'll definitely keep all the hogs out. And the wire is small enough to keep the rabbits out. So with that, we will be able to have a lot more upward space, because right now all of this is in ground. We've got raised beds, we've got raised soil here. Oh, good question. Is it too late to plant butternut squash? You're in Van, Texas. So hey neighbor, we are in Ben Wheeler, Texas. We were just in Van a couple minutes ago before I went live. No, you have plenty of time. So that leads me to my next topic here, and that is planting times and planting zones. So to specifically answer your question about planting in Van, Texas, the easiest way to figure out how much time you have to plant is figure out your frost zones. Hey Sharon, Sharon's my neighbor, not right next door, but in Texas, you're like right next door compared to some of the things. I'm learning distance here in Texas. You're like just down the road is a couple miles, and then, oh, a couple minutes might be like 30 minutes here because Texas is such a big place. So I have, this is just my opinion, and it may not be a popular opinion, and that's okay. Your zone information doesn't really matter as much as your frost dates, because there you can find, and don't get me wrong, I have zone specific planting information on my website. In the description section of this video, by the way, if you haven't hit the thumbs up, please hit the thumbs up for our video and subscribe if you can. In the description section of this video, you will find my comprehensive planting guide. I have put together every single one of those articles I published myself. You will find zone-specific planting information. Now, here's where my opinion might differ from other people. Every year, your frost dates are different. They are never the same. I should say, they're rarely ever the same. So if you use the same exact zone-specific planting guide, you're going to have roughly the same or similar planting. But if you focus on your frost dates, you will have a more accurate idea of what to plant and when to plant. So butternut squash, for example. Christian says what Mary said. I concur. Hey, Christian, thanks for joining us. You're also a fellow Texas gardener here. So if your frost date, you have your first frost date, which is fall. That's your first frost before winter. Your last frost date is spring. So for those of you joining me in Florida, you probably don't have to worry about frost dates, not as much as the rest of us. But your last frost date is very, very important. Your last frost date is usually when you can plant outside. So you're usually going to take your last frost date and you're going to count back 4 to 6 weeks. And that's going to give you an idea of when to plant indoors. Now, your last frost date is going to give you an idea of when to plant outside. So if you are in Van, Texas, or in Ben Wheeler, Texas, our last frost date was March 25th. Now, let me explain that. When you look online, and I use the Old Farmer's Almanac, you look online, they give you an average frost date for like your last 10 years. But then you have to take that information and you have to check your own weather forecast. Now, we call them the weather guessers sometimes because they're not always accurate. We weren't supposed to have any rain until Saturday, this coming Saturday, and we had a couple drops the other night. We had thunderstorm warning and tornado watch. And so you have to focus on what the estimate is, and then you have to focus on your actual weather to determine when that is. Now, butternut squash, let me answer that question that Sharon asked. Butternut squash is 110 days, usually from transplant. So you're looking at about 120 days to 130 days to harvest. So in order to figure out how long you have, you're going to either want to plant after your frost date, which we're already past that. It's 90 degrees out today. It's really hot and beautiful. Or you can take your first frost date, which is going to be in December, maybe late November, and you want to count back 120 to 130 days. Now, if you use that, you've got plenty of time to plant butternut squash. There is a lot of things that we are still planting here. So you still have plenty of time to plant butternut squash. Let me get back to some of these questions here we had. I'm growing lettuce in zone 7-8. Had cool weather until this morning. Weekend's supposed to be really hot and humid. Lettuce only new 2-inch tall leaves. Will it still grow well? Yes and no. It depends on how long of a heat you have. We still have back here, I've got summer bib lettuce and it's still thriving, but it's in the shade of peppers. So what I did was I planted the seeds for the lettuce and then I transplanted seedlings for peppers around it. And so they are semi-shading my lettuce to where even though it's 90 degrees, my lettuce hasn't bolted. Now it's going to start bolting any day now. So I don't have much hope for growing lettuce into June in East Texas, but at least I will still have some lettuce for dinner tonight. So you should still have time. You're in 7A. Just check your forecast for the next 7 to 15 days. I know I use one of the apps and it gives me 10 days. So just check that and see. You can provide some shade for it if you'd like, and that really does help. So this area that I'm sitting in here, This is the distance between one of my rows and my fence on the other side. So I have a shaded area here. And in this area, I'm going to be planting some more stuff, and I'll share with you. I'll share that with you in a couple days, maybe a week or two. But if you have a semi-shaded area, I went live last Thursday and I shared some things that you can plant in shade, and leafy greens are definitely a bonus if you have a shaded area. So if you want to extend your harvest for greens, definitely find a semi-shaded area. I missed what Jesse said here. Jesse said, totally agree. Frostade's more dull. Okay, what are you still planting? Any signs of tomatoes? Okay, so I still have tomatoes, or I do have tomatoes growing. I have got beefsteak tomatoes. I want to say they're pink brandywine, actually. I'm not 100% sure. I have it all written down, but I don't have it off the top of my head. Sharon says, what are you still planting? So I have a giant patch over here of sweet corn that I just now planted. I have a semi-shaded area that I went live in last week, and I'm going to be planting all lettuce and leafy greens in there. You see there's a little row here that's empty behind me. I've got amaranth and I've got carrots growing in there, but I will be planting some more on that little row that doesn't have it. Sunflowers, more winter squash. So I've got, hang on, I'm missing some of your comments here. Hey Keith, you made it. So semi-shaded areas are super helpful. All right, so what am I still going to be planting? I still have winter squash to plant. I did plant some acorn squash. I planted Hubbard squash. I planted Jarradale pumpkin. I will be planting another patch of Geet Okosomen. That is not something that is currently available on our website, but I should have seeds next year or at the end of the season. I just planted Tohono cowpeas. That is also something that is not available on our website right now. It's listed. These are all seeds I'm planting. Cowpeas, southern peas, they thrive in the heat. Okra thrives in the heat. For those of you who don't know the background, we moved to this property in June of last year. I haven't even been here a full year, and we have managed to plant gardens, completely redo our gardens in winter, put up a giant fence. But in July of last year, July 1st was when I started my garden. I planted everything. Now, the tomatoes didn't grow as well because I didn't have enough time. But I did manage to harvest things like, I'm going to give you a little rundown of the easiest stuff that I grew. White scallop squash, yellow scallop squash, Benning's green tint scallop squash. The Geet Okosomen did really well. The coulis corn, it's a purple sweet corn. Literally every single sweet corn we have available, you can plant right now and have a harvest before the end of the year. Every okra variety that I sell, you can plant right now and have a harvest before the end of the year. Every cowpea variety we carry, you can plant right now and have a harvest before the end of the year. The only thing that is not going to do very well right now is going to be cool weather crops like garden peas. Tomatoes tend to take a little longer. You can plant eggplant. We just added a tomato, and I can't even begin to pronounce the variety. It starts with a Q, and I will share a link in the comments as soon as I'm done with this video. I'm almost done because I'm getting eaten alive by mosquitoes here. It's ready to harvest in 40 days after transplant, which is usually 14 days. So you might be able to start harvesting in 60 days. It starts with a Q, and I, off the top of my head, I don't even remember what it translates to in English. Keep in mind, I am incredibly sleep deprived right now. We are bottle feeding tiny, teeny kittens. But I will remember as soon as I get back into the house, and I'll share a link in the comments of this video. So it is May 19th, I think, right now. Oh, Jesse says another one I need for my collection. I'll share that with you in a little bit, Jesse. So there's a lot you can grow right now and harvest in a short period of time. Basil, if you have a semi-shaded area, literally every basil we carry you can grow right now. Summer squash, plenty of time to grow summer squash. Most of the summer squash we grow is about 60 to 70 days from seed. The scallop squash, I've got a video titled 42 days, and I was able to plant seeds and harvest scallop squash in 42 days. I shocked even myself. So I tend to be very focused in the garden when I have to get something done, which is super important. Amaranth is heat loving, and you can plant that right now. I've got some, you might be able to see some little red spots. That is Hopi red dye amaranth. That is, those are volunteers from last year, so they're free food that we have growing in our garden. So there's a lot that you can still plant right now, especially for those of us with longer growing seasons in Texas. I mean, it's hot and it's only gonna get hotter. I just talked to one of my customers that is closer to San Antonio, I think. So he says still early here in central New York. See, you still have plenty of time. She was in the San Antonio area, and she was saying it was about 106 already this week. So it's going to take a little more work in the heat, but we can definitely do it. Katherine Sanderson, she is at Little Bits of Heaven Homestead on YouTube. She is in New Mexico, so she gets really hot and then really cold, and she's growing in her greenhouse and then planting outside. So there's still plenty of things you can grow. Just looking around, checking out my garden. All right, so I'm done for the day. I've already been eaten alive by mosquitoes while I've been out here, and I've got, Wendy says, Atlanta here, it's hot, but we can definitely do it. Definitely. I've got teeny baby kittens to, yes, thank you. Like I said, I'm not even going to try to pronounce that tomato variety, but I will find a way to pronounce it next time I'm on video. Anyway, I got teeny tiny babies that need food, and I've got to eat some dinner myself and maybe take a nap before I got to keep going. So anyway, thank you all for joining me for my live chat. It is always a pleasure to see you all here joining me live. I'll be here next Thursday. Fingers crossed everything works out. And that's it. Thanks for joining me, everybody, and happy planting.